So, Dr. Ashby, tell us, where exactly is the Temple of Philae?
It is right at the traditional border between Egypt to the north and Nubia to the south. And so we have evidence of Kushite kings. Taharka, for example, there are building blocks of his found on this island. The period that I focused on studying is the first 500 years after the birth of Christ. So from like 1 to 500 AD is the period that I'm looking at, because the temple as it stands now on Philae, built all of stone and engraved into into the stone walls of the temple structures are prayer inscriptions in a lot of different languages by all different groups. There are about 500 or 600 inscriptions there, and about 100 of them are securely able to be called Nubian, because the people writing them have names that are clearly not Egyptian. They're using titles that come from the Meroitic language, so a language from the kingdom of Kush further south. But one of my advisors said, and I agree with him, that probably most of the inscriptions that we have engraved into these walls are in fact Nubian. They just happen to be Nubians who are using Egyptian names. And I like to just use the example like, I'm a person of African descent, but my first name is French and my last name is Ashby. If you just saw my name 500 years from now, there would be nothing to let you know that I was not French or English, even though I carry both of those names.
Now, where Philae is located, it's a particular region, and I'm going to say it, but Doc, I know you're going to correct me. Dodekakiosnos.
Oh, Dodekaskoinos.
Oh my God.
That's so funny. I was like, what? Yes.
What in the world? Say it again, Doc.
Dodekaskoinos. And it comes from Greek, and this drives me crazy, but this is a good point to say that basically everything, that all the words that we use to talk about this ancient African civilization are Greek terms. Like I said, Egyptians called their script Medu Neter, and we call them hieroglyphs. That's a Greek term, a Greek translation of Medu Neter. And then Egypt, that's how the Greeks called Hutka Pata. They called it Aiguptos, and we get Egypt. So the Dodekaskoinos means the 12-mile or skoinoi. It's a measure of distance in the ancient world in the Greek language. So this 12-mile land is an area that goes from Philae at that Egyptian southern border about 120 kilometers. It's about 100 miles south. And so this is an area that traditionally served as a buffer zone between Egypt proper, north of Philae, and then the lands of Nubia to the south. And the Egyptians were holding this land throughout their history sort of as a colonial possession. So when the Macedonian Greeks arrived and later the Romans, they too engaged in this practice of sort of holding this land where Nubian people were living, but controlling it as a colony. I should also say that there's abundant gold mines to the east of this area, and so that was a big reason why Egypt and then the Greeks and then the Romans were really interested in controlling the Dodekaskoinos. There's an easier word, we can just call it Lower Nubia.
So it was a buffer zone.
Yes.
But they were controlling it because there was gold there. Really, that's what it was all about. It was about getting the gold. The Egyptians needed the gold to gild their statues, right? And of course, the Romans wanted the gold as well. But this gold is in Nubian territory, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. And I should add that there was at the same time that very powerful last phase of the kingdom of Kush, that is the Meroitic, the kingdom of Meroe. And they were militarily quite powerful, and they also were interested in having access to this gold in Lower Nubia. And so it always was a sort of give and take power plays to see who could control this area and therefore have access to the gold of Nubia.
And so the temple's positioning where it is, it's both military, administrative. There's a lot of reasons why this particular temple is important because of where it's located. And correct me if I'm wrong, I thought I read in your book that the Egyptians believed that the source of the Nile was bubbling up from underneath the temple on that island that's stuck out in the middle of the Nile River.
Yes, and it's kind of weird because clearly they understood because they had traveled up the Nile, so going south into Nubia, they knew that this wasn't the source of the Nile, but mythologically, it was powerful for them to say that the source of the Nile happened there at Philae. Now we know that the Blue Nile originates in Lake Tana in Ethiopia, in the Ethiopian highlands, and that the White Nile originates in an area I think called Mountains of the Moon there in Rwanda, so far south in Central Africa. But for the Egyptians, mythologically, it made sense to say that this was the source of the Nile, so it could be a ritually potent area for them.
So if you're just tuning in, you're listening to another segment of Reclaiming History with Dr. Solange Ashby, PhD, Egyptologist, Nubiologist, and we're talking about her new book, Calling Out to Isis, The Enduring Nubian Presence at Philae, published by Gorgias Press.
There's a special discount code created for Reclaiming History listeners. It's Nubia, spelled Nubia. Get a 30% discount by visiting gorgiaspress.com/calling-out-to-ISIS at www.gorgiaspress, that's GORGIAS press.com.
So, Professor, as you're going through this whole discussion about Philae and where it is located, and we sort of understand the gold is there, this is a strategic location, and the Nubians are at this temple writing in hieroglyphics, right? And at one point, there's a leading family, and since my Greek is so bad, I'm not even going to try. There's a leading family of Nubian administrators and priests that serve at the Philae temple, and they serve for 8 generations.
Yes.
Tell my listeners a little bit about this family.
Yes, amazing family. And this is not Greek. I'm so happy to say this is the name of the family is called Waiakia, and this is a Nubian word. And we use this name for the entire 8 generations of this family because it appears a couple of times in the family. So there's a Waiakia A, a Waiakia B. But they are a prominent Lower Nubian family. So within this Dodekaskoinos area, they are living, but they're working for the kings and queens further south in Merowe. So a couple hundred miles still further south is where the Meroitic royal family rules from. But they hire members of this Waiakia family in Lower Nubia to perform rites on behalf of the rulers in Merowe, but at these temples in Lower Nubia, most prominently the Temple of Philae that we've been discussing, and then another temple further south called Dhaka.
Oh my goodness, we are out of time. To my listeners, tune in again when I will continue my discussion with Dr. Solange Ashby, PhD and Nubiologist, and we will continue to discuss her book, Calling Out to Isis, The Enduring Nubian Presence at Philae.